Loot boxes. Are they just part of the gaming experience, or are they something more dangerous? It's a debate that's been going on for years. But why does it matter? Imagine a young gamer eagerly diving into their favourite game, enticed by the chance to unlock exclusive content. Bright visuals and engaging animations create an exciting atmosphere that is hard to ignore. Even though they know the odds, the thrill of possibly getting something special keeps them coming back for more. Over time, the line between simply playing the game and chasing the rewards becomes harder to see, with the gap between gaming and gambling becoming increasingly blurred. Loot boxes, unfortunately, have a lot in common with traditional forms of gambling. Much like slot machines or roulette, they rely on the element of chance, where players put something of value, typically money, on an uncertain outcome. Over time, loot boxes have incorporated elements similar to casino games, such as spinning wheels, randomized cards, and dice rolls, whilst also adding flashy animations, colourful effects, and sounds that enhance the thrill of opening them. These visual and auditory cues are designed to hook players, triggering a sense of anticipation and excitement, much like the bells and flashing lights of a slot machine. At their core, they function the same way as gambling. Players risk money for the possibility of a desirable but uncertain reward. To make matters worse, the odds of obtaining rare items are often incredibly low, reinforcing these gambling-like mechanics. In Counter-Strike, for instance, the chance of receiving a common mil-spec grade item from a weapon crate is nearly 80%, but the likelihood of landing an exceedingly rare item, such as a knife skin, dropped to as little as 0.26%. Similarly, souvenir packages, another form of loot box, offer coveted items with drop rates as low as 0.0256%. That's 1 in 3,906. These slim chances mirror the unpredictability seen in traditional gambling, drawing an even closer parallel between loot boxes and games of chance like slot machines or lotteries. Valve's Counter-Strike loot boxes generated nearly $1 billion last year, driven by the appeal of rare skins, some of which sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. One skin even had an offer of $1.2 million a few years ago. However, not every loot box system is met with excitement. Star Wars Battlefront 2 faced backlash for locking popular characters and powerful items behind pay-to-win loot boxes, forcing players to either pay up or endure endless grinding. The negative response led EA to remove certain items from loot boxes in an effort to balance gameplay. Eventually, paid loot boxes were eliminated entirely. While players still receive rewards through the loot box system, these are now limited to cosmetic items only, with other rewards being guaranteed after achieving specific in-game goals. But the problem goes beyond just gameplay fairness. The addictive nature of loot boxes has real-world consequences. Parents have discovered their bank accounts emptied by unsuspecting children, and adults have found themselves spiraling into debt after one too many, just one more purchases. These stories aren't just rare occurrences, they highlight the dangerous grip loot boxes can have on people's lives. Take Jonathan, an ordinary gamer who found comfort in the familiar world of FIFA. But in 2017, when his mother was diagnosed with cancer, that comfort morphed into something much darker. The player packs, once a fun, occasional purchase, became his way to escape a reality that was spiraling out of control. What began as spending pocket money slowly escalated. The thrill of getting a star player offered a fleeting sense of relief, but with each moment of excitement came the crushing disappointment of failure. As his addiction grew, Jonathan began hiding his spending from his parents, using vouchers and eventually his own debit card to feed his habit. Soon he was spending £80 at a time, night after night, chasing that rare high. By the time his bank account blocked his transactions, Jonathan had lost nearly £3,000. For Aaron, it wasn't just one game, it was various mobile games. Free-to-play games, they called them. But the real cost revealed itself in the countless purchases required to stay competitive. Aaron's obsession with success drove him to spend thousands of pounds, maxing out a £1,500 credit card. Each time, the rush of buying loot boxes was followed almost immediately by a wave of regret. But the allure of that next box, that next big win, was too strong to resist. Aaron knew he needed to stop, but breaking free wasn't as easy as it seemed. For Susan, the revelation came with a sudden wave of dread. Her 16-year-old son had been playing EA's NBA basketball game, and without her knowing, he had been using her bank card to make purchases. It wasn't until a payment was declined that she realised the full extent of the damage. Nearly £2,000 drained from her bank account. Susan reached out for help, but found herself faced with silence. EA didn't respond, and Google Play had disclaimers about children using their parents' accounts. Thomas Carter never expected his children's love for FIFA to turn into a financial disaster. It started innocently enough. He bought them a single-player pack for £8, thinking it was a harmless treat. But what Thomas didn't know was that his kids had been watching. Over the next 3 weeks, they quietly made purchase after purchase, racking up £550 on his card, never even getting their favourite player Messi, who remained elusive to them. The children, all under the age of 10, didn't understand the consequences of their actions. By the time Thomas and his wife realised what had happened, their bank account had been emptied. Though Nintendo agreed to a full refund, the incident left a stark reminder of just how easily loot boxes can spiral out of control, even for the youngest players. It's important to note that this issue isn't new. When Counter-Strike introduced loot boxes in 2013, players quickly began to experience addiction-related challenges. Many found it difficult to stick to their initial intentions of only opening crates they had received as drops, leading them to spend additional money on cases. Reports of players spending hundreds of pounds, often without receiving desirable items, emerged. Some players even expressed a desire for measures to restrict their spending, highlighting the almost addictive nature of chasing after rare skins. The troubling reality highlighted by these examples underscores a growing concern. The connection between loot boxes and gambling is becoming increasingly clear. Research reveals a troubling trend, with numerous studies indicating significant links between loot box purchases and problem gambling. Here are some studies that delve into this critical issue. A paper published by the Royal Society found that teens who spend money on loot boxes are over twice as likely to show signs of problem gambling compared to those who don't. Additionally, for those already struggling with gambling, they're spending 5 times more on loot boxes than non-gamblers. Moreover, the relationship between loot box spending and gambling in adolescents was twice as strong as what was observed in adults. Sendel and Carnes reinforced these findings by identifying a moderate link between loot box spending and problem gambling, measured through the Problem Gambling Severity Index. James Close and Joanne Lloyd found that loot box spending was skewed towards younger players when they investigated 13,000 UK gamers. This was especially true for younger men. When analysing data from over 7,000 players, they found that just 5% of gamers, those spending more than £70 a month, were responsible for nearly half of all loot box revenue. Of those big spenders, almost a third had serious gambling issues. In interviews with a smaller group of regular loot box purchasers, researchers found that their motivations closely mirrored those seen in gambling. Factors like the thrill of near misses, social pressures, the excitement of opening, susceptibility to advertisement, and feelings of temptation or compulsion were common, all of which are classic gambling triggers. So, it's clear loot boxes aren't just a harmless part of gaming. They share many of the same addictive qualities as gambling, especially for younger players, and they seem to target those who are already vulnerable, with a significant proportion of the revenue coming from those struggling the most. Despite growing concerns over loot boxes and their gambling-like mechanics, regulations vary significantly across countries. Some nations have taken a hard stance, while others have opted for a more lenient approach, often depending on their interpretation of loot box mechanisms. For instance, Belgium took a strict approach back in 2018, outright banning loot boxes that require real money to purchase, unless earned through gameplay. The situation is different in the UK. In 2020, the House of Lords recommended that loot boxes be classified as games of chance under the 2005 Gambling Act, arguing that if a product looks like gambling, feels like gambling, it should be regulated as gambling. Despite these calls, loot boxes are still not officially classified as gambling in the UK. The Gambling Commission maintains that since loot box contents do not have monetary value, they cannot meet the legal definition of gambling. They clarify that this is because the key distinction between loot boxes and traditional gambling is the inability to legitimately cash out reward, even though third-party sites do allow the trading and selling of these items regularly. But these are not technically legal, so this is ignored. Instead of legal regulation, the UK government opted for self-regulation by video game publishers, instructing them to disclose loot box odds and implement measures to protect vulnerable players, particularly children. Globally, the regulatory landscape is just as diverse. While Austria has gone so far as to classify certain loot boxes as illegal gambling, Spain is still processing bills aimed at further regulating loot boxes, of which a draft bill was published back in 2022. Some countries have addressed it from another angle, such as China, which has removed daily login rewards, set playtime limits for under 18s, and recently set new rules to effectively set spending limits for online games. Although these are not strictly aimed at loot boxes, it will still have an effect. Some games companies have started to make changes to how loot boxes work, likely due to increasing pressure and the desire to avoid lawsuits. Instead of completely removing loot boxes, they're opting to reduce the gambling-like elements by offering more transparency. For example, in 2019, Fortnite introduced loot boxes that allowed players to see the contents before buying, and in 2021, FIFA followed with a similar feature that lets players preview items. However, if players don't want the selected loot box, they often have to wait to unlock an alternative, potentially taking 24 hours. This delay could make the system less effective at curbing purchases, as many players may feel compelled to buy rather than to wait for the next option. Even with regulations in place, some game developers continue to push the boundaries when it comes to loot boxes and in-game purchases. Take Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite. In 2023, they were ordered to pay $245 million in refunds to players after a federal settlement, on top of a $275 million fine they had agreed to pay just a few months earlier. The issue? According to the FTC, Fortnite's confusing and inconsistent button layout caused players to incur charges with just a single press. Additionally, parental consent was not required for children to make purchases. As part of the settlement, the FTC barred Epic Games from continuing these kinds of practices. Valve, the developers behind Counter-Strike, also faced consequences in 2023. After losing a lawsuit in Austria, Valve was ordered to refund a player over €14,000 for money spent on Counter-Strike loot boxes. The court ruled that the random contents of the weapon cases, which Valve profited from, constituted illegal gambling under the Austrian law. While Valve can still appeal the decision, this ruling marks another instance of loot boxes being classified as gambling. In a similar case, FIFA 2023 also faced legal action in Austria. FIFA players sued Sony in 2022, accusing them of enabling illegal gambling through FIFA Ultimate Team's player packs. The court ruled in favour of the players, and since Sony didn't appeal, the decision became legally binding. The final point I want to address is the normalisation of loot boxes in modern gaming, which leads some players to dismiss them as gambling. Titles like FIFA, Counter-Strike and Overwatch have woven loot boxes into their core gameplay mechanics, making them commonplace. However, this wasn't always the case. When microtransactions and loot boxes first appeared, they received backlash. The gaming community was vocal about their dislike for these products. For example, with Counter-Strike's introduction of loot boxes, many linked this feature to gambling and expressed concern about its potential impact on younger audiences. Fast forward to today, and it's now almost expected for certain games to incorporate loot boxes as part of their monetization strategies. Another factor contributing to the perception of loot boxes as non-gambling is their use of in-game currency, which creates a detachment from real money. However, when players can purchase this in-game currency, they are still effectively spending real money to engage with these mechanics. This disconnect allows some players to overlook their financial investment. In fact, this separation can lead to worse gambling behaviours, as players may lose track of their spending when using in-game currency instead of real money. So, what do I think of loot boxes? Well, it's clear that regulation is slowly improving, but there's still a long way to go. Personally, I don't agree with the concept of loot boxes, particularly when there's real money involved. Free loot boxes are less of an issue, but they can still normalise a gambling mindset. Players who start with free loot boxes may be more likely to spend money on paid ones later, either in the same game or in others. Take RuneScape for example, where players receive daily free keys for Treasure Hunter, but after that they can purchase more. This kind of setup isn't harmless. Having both free and paid versions in the same game is problematic because it creates a bridge between casual play and real money spending. In my opinion, if a game offers paid loot boxes alongside free ones, it's just encouraging players to make that jump into spending, which I don't think is good for the gaming community. The normalisation of loot boxes and microtransactions in general is concerning, especially when you consider how in-game currency can blur the lines of spending. This detachment can lead to increased spending habits, as players might overlook their financial investments. Coupled with the psychological conditioning that loot boxes impose, triggering dopamine rushes and keeping players hooked on the thrill of potential rewards, this can easily morph into a compulsive chase for items, further blurring the distinction between gaming and gambling. While it's encouraging to see some regulatory efforts and industry changes, I believe stricter rules are still necessary to protect players from those predatory mechanics, especially those who are more vulnerable like younger audiences. But what about you? Do you believe loot boxes should be classified as gambling? Should they remain part of gaming? Or do you think they should be banned entirely? If you or someone you know is facing challenges related to gambling, please take a moment to check the links in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.